Market rates, Sarah said, her voice flat as she glanced up from my salary adjustment request. That single phrase hammered through me like a physical blow I couldn't defend against. These new graduates bring fresh perspectives, contemporary skills. They've been trained on systems you've had to learn on the job. 7 years. 7 years I had spent building the foundation of her company, working 60-hour weeks, creating the training programs these fresh perspectives were now benefiting from. But they're making 50% more than me, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. An email had been accidentally forwarded to me, a compensation breakdown for the new hire cohort. The numbers had burned into my retinas. I designed the product architecture they're using. I wrote the manuals they're learning from. Saris leaned forward, her expression unchanged. Amira, the market has shifted. Your compensation reflects when you were hired, not current conditions. We value your contributions, but this is business, not personal. We value your contributions, not personal. The same phrase she'd used when denying my last 3 requests for a raise. When I'd missed my sister's wedding, to finish the Henderson project. When I'd worked through pneumonia to meet a deadline she'd promised a client. So adjust me to market rate, I said, pushing the industry compensation report across her pristine glass desk. That's not possible. Your position is established. The budget is allocated. Then, promote me. My performance reviews are excellent, yes, but there's no opening at the next level currently. She closed my folder with a decisive snap. This is how business works. Accept it, or there's the door. The world tilted sideways. 7 years of loyalty reduced to an ultimatum in a 10-minute meeting that I could tell she was already mentally checking out of. I need to think about this, I said, standing on unsteady legs. Take the weekend, Saris replied, already reaching for her phone. But I'll need your decision Monday. The product roadmap meeting is at 9, and I'd like clarity on staffing. I walked out of her office, past the row of new hire cubicles where laughter floated above the partitions. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection, a woman I barely recognized anymore. Dark circles under bloodshot eyes, hair hastily pulled back, the same blouse I'd worn Tuesday because I hadn't had time to do laundry. That night, as I scrolled through years of emails from Saris, need you to handle this. Can you stay late? Weekend work required. I found something that changed everything. Something that would make arriving early Monday morning worth every second of the 7 years I'd given her. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Your support means everything, and it helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Drop a comment letting me know if you've ever been in a similar situation. My name is Amira Kapoor, and until that Friday afternoon, I was the most loyal employee Saris Turner had ever hired. I was 25 when I joined her emerging tech consulting firm as employee number 6. Now, at 32, I'd watched the company grow to over 200 people, with offices in 3 cities. I'd been there when we couldn't make payroll and Saris had asked us to defer half our salaries for 2 months. I'd been there when our first major client threatened to pull their contract, and I'd spent 4 days straight rewriting specifications to save the relationship. I'd been there when Saris's mother died, and I'd managed both our workloads for weeks without complaint. During those early years, Saris had felt like family. We're in this together, she'd say during late nights when we'd order takeout and strategize about the company's future. When we make it, we all make it. But success changed things. Or maybe it just revealed the truth that had always been there. When the company hit its first $1 million in revenue, Saris bought herself a Tesla. When we hit 10 million, she purchased a vacation home. My salary had increased by just 12% over 7 years. Despite the company's exponential growth, each time I'd asked about advancement, the answer was always some version of soon, or next quarter, or after this project. I'd believed her. That was the hardest part to swallow. I'd actually believed her. But as I sat in my 1-bedroom apartment that Friday night, the same apartment I'd had when I started because I still couldn't afford to move, something broke inside me. Not in a way that meant defeat. In a way that brought clarity. The email I'd found was from 3 years ago. Saris had written to our CFO, Amira's compensation. Keep her at current level. She's too valuable in her position to promote, and she's unlikely to leave. She's emotionally invested in our story. and the sunk cost is too high for her to walk away. Standard 2% annual adjustment only. They had been deliberately underpaying me because they thought I wouldn't leave, because I was emotionally invested, because my loyalty was a weakness they could exploit. I called my best friend Darian, who worked in HR at another company. That's wage suppression, he said immediately. And if they're doing it to you, they're probably doing it to others. Do you have access to the compensation database? No, I said, but I know someone who does. Penn had been our IT manager for nearly as long as I'd been there. He'd always had a soft spot for me after I'd helped him implement the company-wide system upgrade when his assistant quit mid-project. I need a favor, I told him when he answered my call. And before you say no, I want you to know it's about something wrong happening at the company. There was silence on the line. Then, this sounds like the kind of conversation that should happen in person. Meet me at Barlow's in 30 minutes. Barlow's was a dive bar, 3 neighborhoods away from any place company people would go. When I arrived, Penn was in a back booth, nursing a beer. You sounded serious, he said as I slid into the seat across from him. I am. I showed him the email from Saris to the CFO. His expression darkened as he read it. That's messed up. I think it's happening to others too. I need to know. Penn studied me for a long moment. What exactly are you asking me to do? I need the compensation data. For everyone who's been there more than 2 years, compared to new hires in similar roles. He took a long drink of his beer. That's not just against company policy. That could be illegal. So is intentionally suppressing wages based on the assumption that employees won't leave because of emotional manipulation. Penn's fingers drummed on the sticky table. Finally, he said, I can't give you access, but I might be able to run a report for my own audit purposes. He gave me a meaningful look. Sometimes I leave my audit reports in a shared folder temporarily before moving them to the secure server. By Sunday morning, I had the data, and it was worse than I'd imagined. Every employee who'd been with the company more than 3 years was being paid significantly less than market rate, on average 40% less. New hires were brought in at market or above. The longest tenured employees were the most underpaid. And there was more. Emails between Saris and the executive team referred to this as their retention cost management strategy. They had identified employees who demonstrated high company loyalty indicators and deliberately kept their compensation below market, betting on emotional attachment and career inertia to keep them from leaving. My hands were shaking as I compiled the information. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about dozens of people being systematically exploited. I had a decision to make. I could walk away, find another job at market rate, and leave Saris and her company behind. Or I could do something that would change everything. I chose the latter. Monday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I woke at 4:30 a.m., dressed with purpose, and drove to the office while the world was still dark. The security guard, Vicente, raised an eyebrow as I swiped my badge at 5:15 a.m. Early bird today, Amira? He asked. Big presentation, I replied with a smile that felt completely new on my face. Not forced, not exhausted, determined. The building was empty, exactly as I needed it to be. I went straight to Saris's office, the corner suite with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city she so often bragged about during client meetings. I placed a sealed envelope on her chair, not on her desk, where an assistant might find it, but directly on the chair, where only she would see it when she sat down. Inside was a single page with 3 things: my resignation effective immediately, a copy of her email about keeping me underpaid, and a USB drive containing the compensation analysis. But I wasn't done. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop one last time. The email I'd drafted the night before was addressed to every employee who'd been with the company more than 2 years, 47 people in total. The subject line read, Why you're being underpaid, the truth about our compensation strategy. My finger hovered over the send button. Was I really going to do this? Burn every bridge? Expose the company I'd helped build from the ground up? Then I remembered Saris's words. Accept it, or there's the door. I pressed send. After that, I walked through the office one last time. I touched the wall of the conference room where I'd presented my first client proposal. I passed the break room where we'd celebrated our first major contract with cheap champagne and pizza. So many memories. So much of myself left in these walls. By 6:30 a.m., I was back in my car, watching as the early arrivals began trickling into the parking lot. At precisely 7 a.m., I knew Saris would be walking into her office. She was religiously punctual. 5 minutes later, my phone rang with her name on the screen. I declined the call. It rang again immediately. Declined. A text message. What the hell is this? Call me now. I didn't respond. At 7:15, the first reply to my mass email arrived in my personal inbox. From Elena in marketing, who'd been there almost as long as I had. Is this for real? Followed by shocked emoji faces. By 7:30, my phone was lighting up with messages from colleagues. Some confused, some angry, many thankful. Devi from Product wrote, I suspected something was off when I found out the new guy on my team was making 30K more than me. Thank you for this. At 8 a.m., Saris called again. This time, I answered, You have 60 seconds to explain yourself before I sue you for corporate espionage, she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. Actually, I have evidence of illegal wage suppression practices that I'd be happy to share with the Department of Labor, I replied calmly. Or we could discuss a better solution. What solution? Her voice was suddenly wary. Meet me at the Cardinal at 9:30. Come alone. The Cardinal was a coffee shop equidistant between the office and my apartment. Neutral territory. When I arrived at 9:25, I chose a table in the back corner, with a view of the door. Saris walked in at 9:32, her expression thunderous as she scanned the room and spotted me. You've lost your mind, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Do you have any idea what you've done? The chaos you've created? I've simply shared information that people had a right to know, I replied. Information about how you've been systematically exploiting their loyalty. That information was confidential. Her knuckles whitened around her purse strap. You had no right. Like you had no right to deliberately suppress wages while telling people you valued them, while building a company culture around family and togetherness. That was really just a trap to keep people working for less than they deserved. Her jaw tightened. It's standard business practice to manage compensation costs. You're naive if you think otherwise. Lying to people isn't standard practice. Targeting the most loyal employees for exploitation isn't standard practice. I leaned forward. And now everyone knows. What do you want? Money? Is that it? Some kind of blackmail payment? I laughed softly. If I wanted money, I would have quietly threatened you with this information, taken a settlement, and disappeared. But this isn't about money. Then what? Justice. Change. I pulled out a folder and placed it between us. Inside is a comprehensive compensation adjustment plan that brings every employee up to market rate, with back pay for the most egregious cases. There's also a transparency policy for future compensation decisions. Saris stared at the folder like it might bite her. You expect me to bankrupt the company over this? I've run the numbers. The company can afford it, with the recent funding round. It would reduce executive bonuses for 2 quarters. Nothing more. I pushed the folder closer to her. Implement this plan by the end of the week, and I delete all copies of the data I've collected. I say nothing further. The company survives with some bruised egos and a valuable lesson. And if I refuse, then by this time tomorrow, your investors, clients, and the Department of Labor will all have copies of everything I found. Your choice. Saris's face flushed with anger. You ungrateful little... Careful, I interrupted. Remember which one of us has leverage here. She grabbed the folder and stood up. I need to review this with legal. You have until 5 p.m. tomorrow. After that, my lawyer sends the evidence package I prepared over the weekend. As Saris stormed out, my phone buzzed with a message from Penn. Emergency all hands called for 11 a.m. What did you do? I didn't respond. Instead, I drove home and waited. By noon, messages were flooding in from colleagues at the all-hands meeting. According to Devi, Saris had announced a comprehensive compensation review due to recently identified inconsistencies in their pay structure. She promised adjustments would be made by the end of the week. That evening, I received a formal email from the company's legal team confirming my resignation had been accepted and requesting I sign an NDA in exchange for a separation package equal to 6 months' salary. I declined the offer. The next morning, 3 more employees resigned. By the end of the week, the number had grown to 12, all long-term underpaid staff who'd found better opportunities elsewhere now that they knew their true market value. 1 month later, I was having lunch with Elena, who'd recently left for a director position at another company with a 70% salary increase. "Did you hear?" she asked, eyes wide with gossip. The board forced Saris to step down. The exodus continued after we left, almost 20 people in total. They lost the Hendricks contract because the entire team that serviced it quit. I sipped my water. I hadn't heard. And that's not all. Elena leaned closer. The remaining employees formed a committee and demanded the company bring in a compensation consultant to create an entirely new, transparent pay structure. The board agreed to all of it. "Good for them," I said. Rumor is Saris tried to blame it all on the CFO, but then someone leaked emails proving she was the architect of the whole strategy. Elena gave me a knowing look. "Any idea who might have done that?" I shrugged innocently. "No idea. The truth was, I hadn't needed to leak anything further. The initial revelation had been enough to start an unstoppable cascade. Once people know they're being taken advantage of, they don't just get angry, they get motivated." Meanwhile, I'd received 4 job offers within 2 weeks of leaving, all at proper market rates. I'd accepted the most interesting one, a position that actually recognized my experience and compensated me accordingly. But the real victory came 6 weeks after my resignation. I received an email from the company's new interim CEO, their former COO, Nathan, asking if I would consider returning as head of product strategy with a compensation package nearly double what I'd been making. "We've implemented all the changes you proposed," the email read, "and we're committed to building a truly fair and transparent organization. Your insights were painful but necessary medicine. We'd like you to help us rebuild the right way." I considered the offer seriously. Part of me wanted to return triumphantly, to see the changes I'd forced into existence, but another part knew that some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. I drafted a polite decline, recommending they promote Teresa from within, a brilliant strategist who'd been overlooked for years and who, according to my sources, had been a key leader in the employee committee, demanding change. That evening, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. I'd loved that company once, had poured my heart and soul into it. The betrayal still stung, but less sharply now. My phone lit up with a text from Penn. "You left something major out of your resignation letter." "What's that?" I replied. "That you were actually the most valuable person in the entire company. Chaos theory proven. Remove one critical element and watch the system collapse." I smiled and set down my phone. The revenge had never been about destroying the company. It had been about forcing change that would have never happened otherwise. About refusing to accept being undervalued and exploited. About standing up not just for myself, but for everyone who had been manipulated into accepting less than they deserved. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can leave behind is the truth. The next day, I received one final message that proved the impact of what I'd done reached far beyond that one company. It was a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't know. "You don't know me, but I work at a company where your story has spread like wildfire. Today, our CEO announced a comprehensive compensation review to ensure internal equity. Thank you for starting something that's bigger than all of us." That LinkedIn message was just the beginning. Over the next few months, my inbox filled with similar notes from strangers at different companies, people who'd heard my story through industry networks and been inspired to investigate their own compensation situations. I hadn't set out to become a workplace justice advocate, but somehow, it happened anyway. "Would you consider speaking at our HR ethics conference?" Read one email from a professional association. "Your experience highlights systemic issues many organizations need to address." At first, I declined these invitations. I was focused on excelling at my new job, one that actually valued my contributions with both recognition and appropriate compensation. But the requests kept coming, and gradually I began to see that my experience wasn't unique. It was part of a larger pattern across the entire corporate landscape. 6 months after leaving Saris's company, I accepted my first speaking invitation at a Women in Tech event. Standing at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, I felt an unexpected swirl of emotions. "I'm not here to tell you to burn down your careers," I began. "I'm here to tell you that knowing your worth isn't selfish. It's necessary for change to happen." As I shared the details of my experience, the years of false promises, the deliberate wage suppression, the revelation that finally pushed me to act, I watched recognition dawn on many faces. When I opened the floor for questions, hands shot up everywhere. "How did you find the courage?" asked one young woman in the front row. I considered this carefully. It wasn't courage, exactly. It was exhaustion, with accepting less than I deserved. There's a tipping point where staying quiet becomes more painful than speaking up. I simply reached mine. After the talk, a group of 5 women approached me. They all worked at the same financial services firm and had discovered similar patterns of wage disparity. "We want to do something," their unofficial leader, Grace, told me. "But we're afraid of retaliation, of being blacklisted in the industry." I exchanged contact information with them and promised to help however I could. Over coffee, the following week, we developed a strategy that would protect them individually while still creating necessary change. 2 weeks later, Grace sent me a triumphant text. It worked. Management announced a company-wide compensation review and immediate adjustments for internal equity reasons. They're terrified someone will go public. Word continued to spread. I created a private online forum where people could share their experiences and strategies for addressing wage inequality. Within 3 months, it had over 2,000 members. I was careful to never advocate anything illegal, instead focusing on education, transparency, and collective action. "Knowledge is leverage" became our unofficial motto. Even as this movement grew around me, my personal life was transforming too. With my new, appropriately compensated position, I finally moved out of my 1-bedroom apartment into a place with an actual home office and enough space to breathe. I reconnected with my sister, whose wedding I'd missed years ago for Sarah's deadline, and made a point of visiting her monthly. Nearly a year after my resignation, I received an unexpected email from Teresa, the colleague I'd recommended for promotion at my former company. "Having drinks with some of the team tonight at Bellamy's. 7 p.m. Thought you might want to join us." I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Did I want to revisit that part of my past? See people who had witnessed my most vulnerable and vindictive moments? Curiosity won out. Walking into Bellamy's that evening felt surreal, like stepping back in time, but as a completely different person. Teresa spotted me immediately and waved me over to a large table where 8 former colleagues sat. "The legend herself," Penn called out, raising his glass as I approached. "The woman who brought down an empire with a single email. The empire seems to be standing just fine," I replied, sliding into an empty chair. "Different empire," Elena clarified. "Better one." Over the next 2 hours, they filled me in on the company's transformation. After Sarah's departure, Nathan had implemented every change I'd demanded and more. A transparent compensation structure, regular market rate adjustments, bonuses tied to company performance that included all employees, not just executives. "Remember Jameson?" Teresa asked, referring to one of the fresh graduates who'd been hired at 50% more than my salary. He found out what happened and was horrified. Apparently, they told new hires that their higher salaries were because they had specialized skills the rest of us lacked. "He's heading up a mentorship program now," Penn added, "pairing new hires with veterans so institutional knowledge gets shared." His idea. I felt an unexpected warmth hearing how the company had evolved. My revenge had been about justice, not destruction, and it seemed justice had prevailed. As we were preparing to leave, Nathan himself walked into the bar. He stopped short when he saw me, then approached our table. "Amira," he said, extending his hand. "I heard rumors you might be here." I stood and shook his hand, studying his face for signs of resentment. I found none. "How are things?" I asked neutrally. "Better, different, harder in some ways, easier in others." He glanced at the group, then back to me. "Would you have a moment to chat privately?" At a small table away from the others, Nathan got straight to the point. "What you did," he began, then paused to choose his words carefully. "It was necessary, painful, but necessary. I wanted you to know that I see that now. I wasn't trying to burn everything down," I said. "I know. You were trying to fix what was fundamentally broken." He twisted his drink slowly. "The board brought in consultants to review everything after the exodus. Do you know what they found?" I shook my head. That if we'd continued on Sarah's path, we would have eventually imploded anyway. Constant turnover of institutional knowledge, declining product quality, cultural toxicity. He met my eyes directly. You didn't destroy the company, Amira. You saved it. Something tight in my chest loosened at his words, a knot of doubt I hadn't realized I was carrying. There's something else, Nathan continued. Saris is starting a new company. She's been approaching our clients, our employees. Same promises, same vision. And you're telling me this because people should know who they're really dealing with. History shouldn't repeat itself. He slid a flash drive across the table. All the documentation from our internal investigation. Legal says we can't publish it, but there's no rule against me giving it to a private citizen. I stared at the small device. What am I supposed to do with this? Whatever you think is right. He stood to leave. You've proven you have good judgment about that. That night, I stayed up late reviewing the files Nathan had given me. They included everything: internal communications, compensation analyses, exit interview data, painting a comprehensive picture of systematic exploitation that went beyond even what I'd uncovered. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't directly expose Saris again. Instead, I would use this information to create something more lasting, a framework for identifying and addressing compensation inequity that companies could implement proactively, a guidebook for employees to recognize warning signs, resources for those facing similar situations. 3 months later, I published an anonymous case study based on the data, changing all identifying details, but preserving the patterns and strategies. It quickly became required reading in business ethics courses at several universities. 18 months after my resignation, I received an invitation to speak at a major industry conference about transparency and equity in corporate compensation. On the speakers list, directly after my session, was Saris Turner herself, presenting on building smart compensation strategies. When I saw her name, I laughed out loud. The universe had a sense of humor, after all. I accepted the invitation. On the day of the conference, the room was packed for my session. As I discussed the importance of fair compensation practices and the business case for transparency, I noticed Sarah slip into the back row midway through. Our eyes met briefly. She didn't look away. When I finished to enthusiastic applause, I gathered my notes and stepped down from the podium. As I moved toward the exit, Saris intercepted me. Impressive presentation, she said coolly. Very idealistic. Thank you, I replied. I'm looking forward to your session. I assume you'll be covering how undervaluing experienced employees leads to company implosion? Her expression hardened. You have no idea the damage you caused. Actually, I do. The question is whether you've learned anything from it. Before she could respond, a young woman approached us, her conference badge identifying her as an HR director at a growing tech firm. Miss Kapoor, your talk was incredible. Would you consider coming to speak to our leadership team? We're revamping our compensation structure and could really use your insights. I smiled. I'd be happy to. Here's my card. The young woman thanked me and walked away. Saris watched her go, then turned back to me. You've made quite a name for yourself from all this, she observed, her tone suggesting I'd somehow profited from wrongdoing. That wasn't the goal, I replied honestly. The goal was change. It still is. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed something like regret in her eyes, quickly masked by her usual composure. Well, she said briskly, I should prepare for my session. As she walked away, I felt the final weight lift from my shoulders. I no longer needed her approval, her recognition, or even her remorse. My worth wasn't defined by her assessment or anyone else's. 2 years after placing that envelope on Saris's chair, I published a book about workplace equity that became a bestseller. I started consulting with companies committed to building fair compensation structures. And most surprisingly, I found myself mentoring young professionals on how to advocate for themselves from the beginning of their careers, rather than after years of exploitation. The greatest revenge wasn't bringing Saris down or exposing the company's practices. It was creating lasting change that would prevent others from experiencing what I had endured. That envelope I left on her chair didn't just change my life, it started a ripple effect that continues to expand. And in the end, that's worth far more than the salary I was denied for all those years. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. If you found value in hearing about my journey, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these important conversations reach more people who might be experiencing similar situations. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up for your worth in the workplace? What happened? Let's keep this conversation going, because change happens one brave action at a time.